Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Logtech Live in 2022. Deuce is wild. I'm Eric Johnson. I'm the host of Logtech Live. I'm also a technology editor at the Journal of Commerce. Welcome back to those of you who've caught episodes in the past. Welcome. If this is your first episode, really glad to have you here. Um, Before we get going, I wanted to give, as always, a big thanks to Chain.io for sponsoring our show each month. Really appreciate their support, and they make this all possible, along with Sarah and her team at Let's Talk Supply Chain. So I'm coming to you live from Logtech headquarters in snowy Alexandria, Virginia. We've gotten a ton of snow this week, which is cool and unusual, but also fun, snowballs and everything. I'm also in my son's bedroom today because the Wi-Fi rules here, so I've decided to temporarily relocate here. Um, Lots going on in our world, both from a tech perspective and a broader logistics perspective. It's almost too much. I sort of joke on Twitter every once in a while about the fire hose of news blasting me and everyone in the face these days. And it's true. It's just unrelenting, really, right? I mean, this week we just saw a shutdown or partial shutdown of terminals in the port of Ningbo, and the impact that may have on some cargo that's arriving, that's trying to depart pre-Lunar New Year. So it's just sort of like one thing after another, but with this layer of congestion and upheaval and chaos that's going on in global supply chains. We're also in the winter season here. Obviously, there was a massive pileup of cars and trucks just south of me here, just heading into DC earlier this week. That was really horrible. Trucks were involved in that in terms of being caught up in that as well. So we're in the winter season. Expect more upheaval to come. So I am going to walk through, as I normally do, a few stories of interest to me that have come up. Um, First, I wanted to, Ports of LA and Long Beach are kind of like permanently in the news for me right now. And I wanted to address a story that I did just before the new year, actually. The Port of Long Beach released sort of a foreshadowing of a to be released visibility or visibility data hub that they're going to make public in February. And it's interesting. On the surface, it's great. More data availability, more conduits for the different parties involved in global trade to have access to critical milestones. Super important. But we can't look at it in a vacuum. We have to look at it in the context into which this new platform is coming into. The neighboring port of Los Angeles has its own sort of data hub portal called the Port Optimizer. It's going to be interesting to see how these two things kind of work in tandem and how interoperable they are, how usable they are against one another or with one another. Because if you're a cargo interest, if you are a dray operator in Southern California, if you are anybody who's a representative of a shipper, it's a lot of systems to manage already. And if you're talking about adding another one that's sort of all encompassing for all the terminals in the Port of Long Beach, that's not necessarily an ideal situation. We'll have to see how this all plays out. But it's just another, I call it, instead of a data lake or a data node, it's a data mosaic, right? This is the word I keep using. There's all these little tiles, and do they make a picture? Yes, sometimes. No, sometimes. So we'll have to see, but I'll be keeping my eye on this, obviously. The next story I wanted to get into was one that I did in mid-December, just after our last episode. And this was actually news that came out a couple months ago. And it was about Convoy, the sort of, they've moved from digital broker to just, we have to call them a broker now. And I'm sure they aspire to be more than that. They released a capability that allows fellow brokers to access their network of carriers. And those are, as a foreshadowing for our guest today, those are carriers that sometimes are out of the sort of view of a lot of brokers and certainly a lot of shippers. So what Convoy is saying is, give us your loads from your shippers and we'll allow you to tap in a very user-friendly digital way into our network of small carriers that are looking on our platform for loads. What it does is sort of put this interesting competition context, or provide this interesting competition context. Will other 3PLs, will other brokers be happy to work with Convoy in this way? Is there scope for this type of arrangement to grow? Are all brokers in competition with each other? That's kind of the bigger picture question. So I encourage you to read this story. There's a couple Twitter threads on it. I've written a little bit on my Substack around this. We will have to see. It's interesting. I think the proof, I've gotten a lot of inquiries about this, and I think the proof is in the pudding, right? Like, if brokers feel there's value in this as part of their like range of channels to reach small carriers, then it works, and it doesn't go against this idea that brokers can't work together. If there's very little uptake, Convoy is going to pivot and go another direction, and it will bear out that really brokers ought not to be working with one another in this way. So we'll see. As with everything, we'll see how this plays out. So next topic I wanted to sort of address. This actually was interesting. This came on across my feed like really late last night, and I thought it was worth addressing. So Mayor Pete, Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, posted a interesting editorial. I won't say it's interesting, actually. It was a little, I would say, bland in terms of like what it described. It was a sort of a treatise on the importance of innovation behind transportation. And that goes beyond freight. He was talking about mobility and people transportation, all those things. The interesting thing that I took away from it was he was sort of insinuating that the DOT is going to be there to foster innovation on the supply side. In other words, the innovators who are trying to solve problems. My contention when I read that story or the editorial, was that at least in logistics right now, the problem is not a limit on the supply side. Innovation is not limited on the supply side. I don't have enough time in the day to talk to all the cool companies and founders that are doing cool things and the VCs that are looking to fund them, right? That is not the constraint. The constraint is on the consumption or demand side. Adoption, I would say DOT probably needs to do more work in terms of getting the users to adopt all of the innovation that is currently being created than to keep sort of plugging cash or support into companies that already have tools to innovate, right? So we really have an adoption problem or a consumption problem more than an innovation supply problem. So last piece is that I wanted to sort of walk us through is my most recent Substack from last week, the last one of 2021, where I kind of touched on this interesting dynamic that's come about, at least in our space. I won't say this is new potentially to other industries, but this idea that founders most of whom have raised a decent amount of money, or have other sources of income besides venture capital, are themselves turning into investors into other early stage companies. And I sort of broke down all the different paths that investment can take. Is this founder looking to just bet on other good companies that have absolutely nothing to do with their own company? This is a promising company. I love the founder, right? They're just angels. Is it because they've raised a lot of money and they need to convert some of that capital into faster growth than they and their own company are able to generate? So sort of this subcontracted investment model. That's kind of how I describe it. And I think this is actually a lot of what's happening in the logistics industry. Are those investments that founders are making being made to support the ecosystem they are trying to build? So technologies that can be complementary, companies that maybe target to acquire or ingest in some way or use, right? So It's very interesting, and I'm certainly going to be tracking this as time goes on. It's only going one direction, right? So we're only seeing more and more founders, especially as round sizes get huge and they have a lot of cash to do interesting things with. So that leads me into as probably a perfect background to my guest today, who is Tobenna Arodiogbu. I hope I did not butcher that as bad as I knew I was going to. Who's CEO of CloudTrucks. CloudTrucks. I'll let Tobenna kind of go through his backstory and CloudTruck's backstory, but the interesting news is a couple months ago they had a fairly sizable funding round that valued the company in the $850 million range, somewhere around there. So we will get into that and what that valuation means. But first, Tobenna, welcome to the show. Really glad you could join us. And if you could maybe start with kind of your background and what the idea behind CloudTrucks was.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me, Eric. So my background has mostly been in product management and building different software products in different traditional industries. So years ago, I worked at a company where we were building HR and benefits software for small businesses. I've worked on real estate software at a company called Open Door. And then prior to starting CloudTrucks, I started a company called Scotty Labs, where we were building remote operations and autonomous driving technology for the trucking industry to help truck drivers kind of extend the hours that they wanted to work, and also to help build safer technology for the trucking industry. So that company was called Scotty Labs. It was acquired by DoorDash, and then founded CloudTrucks in 2019, September of 2019, along with my co-founders. And with CloudTrucks, the idea was basically to build a full set of business management solutions for trucking entrepreneurs. I had noticed during my time at Scotty Labs, and this certainly resonated too from prior experiences, that these trucking entrepreneurs, owner operators, were just having a lot of trouble managing all of the stuff that they have to manage in order to run a successful trucking business. And we wanted to build something that just made their lives a lot easier, help them generate more revenue, help them manage their cash flow, help them lower their costs, so they could focus on driving, and they could focus on driving whatever they wanted to, right, and really owning their time. So that's what we've been working on here, and it's been pretty interesting so far.
Yeah, so CloudTrucks first came on my radar, I believe a VC mentioned them in a group of companies that were sort of like, hey, is this company on your radar? And this was probably like maybe late 19, early 20, before the pandemic for sure. And it felt like a long time before I actually got to sit down and have a chat with you. It was way overdue when we finally did. But you are part of a cohort of companies, I would say small, relatively small still, that I've been writing about a lot because I find it really interesting. My primary, focus is, what does technology mean to the cargo owner? And then how does that spiral out to all the service providers that, cater to them, whether it's asset-based or not. And shippers are not ever going to buy your software. They may not ever even see your webpage, right? But what I find interesting about what you're doing and some of the other companies that are maybe addressing it a little differently is you're providing software that enables the companies that these shippers rely on to be better run, more profitable, more optimized, and also allows them to structure their business in a way that's more visible to the shippers and their brokers, right? So I'm fascinated by this space, and we're going to get into, I have a whole bunch of questions about that space, but I do want to start off with kind of the more recent news, which is the funding round. So I'm always sort of interested in founders' views about what entices them about sort of using venture capital as this lever to like, drive growth, right? And so what does a round of the size that you raised, what's the thinking behind going after that much, and what does it enable you to do?
Yeah, so I think of fundraising and actually like I appreciate these series of rounds and things being broken out in that way because that's definitely how I think about company building, where at each stage you're trying to prove out a set of theses that you have, right? With the most recent round, we were at a point where we felt like we've built some software that's pretty interesting and certainly useful to our customers, right? The way I like to think about it is we've built V1 of a number of different things, and we've seen how customers are using those, and we've seen that it's appealing to a large set of customers across the trucking industry. Now we're at a point where we want to build V2 of a number of those things, and we also want to be able to get our software in front of more and more customers across the trucking industry, right? So investing more in marketing and sales and growth because we're at a point where we think we've solved a number of key problems. So we're certainly more comfortable kind of going out to a broader set of folks. And we also need to hire more engineering talent and product and operations and customer success and all of those things to make sure that when we do bring these customers on, we're building a deeper set of solutions for their problems, and we're able to also ensure that they're happy. So that's really how I think about fundraising. The size of the round I think is a testament to what we've been able to accomplish over the past 2 years since we founded the company, and really over the past year and a half since we launched the initial product. But we didn't really go out seeking to raise that size of a round. It just kind of happened as we continue the conversations with different investors.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of excitement in this market right now. I mean, in general, but especially around our space. So as you might imagine, I'm sure you hear these things too. I get it a lot. What uh is this? There's a certain amount of skepticism, right, from people who've been in this market for a while. Like, why does a business that's ostensibly about driving efficiency and that's built around software, why does it need so much cash in such a short period of time to get where it needs to go, relative to kind of a company that was founded in '05 and kind of built the old fashioned way, right? Like, what can you kind of walk people through, like, that part of this, because the numbers are eye popping, right? Like, in
Right.
if we step aside from like the VC craziness, the numbers are eye popping, right? So like, I think it helps people understand what that means.
Yeah, so there's an assumption that if you're raising a large amount of funding, it means that you are burning a large amount of capital on a year-to-year basis. That's certainly not the case with us or with our business. I mean,
Yeah.
we are right now a 60-person company, or maybe 65 person company, right? So it's not that we need to burn $100 million a year in order to grow the business. It's more so that I think we want to make sure that we have the capital to be able to invest in the different ways that we're investing for the long term, right? We're not just investing for next year and the year after that. We fully intend to be here for the next decade, and we want to make investments over that time period. So that's really the right way to think about it, as opposed to thinking of it as like we need $100 million, for the next year or anything like that.
Yeah, that's super interesting that you bring this up, because this is certainly something that I've seen founders talk about a lot, in the last couple of years, in at least the ones I pay attention to, is this idea of blitz scaling really doesn't work in logistics the way it might have in another industry where it was more kind of open field, and like there was more, right? I mean, this
Yeah.
you're entering an industry where there are established players who are not going to lie down necessarily. Like, maybe they have some inefficiencies, but
Yeah.
that's always been the misalignment from kind of very early investment into logistics, maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago,
Mhm.
to now, where that's crystal clear, at least from the conversations I have.
Yeah, and it's not even just a question of existing industry players or anything like that. I think when you're dealing with physical assets moving around the country, it's very different from just selling software that strictly stays in the world of bits, right? So we're definitely mindful of that. We have to be really good at building software for our customers, but we also have to be really mindful of the fact that our customers operate in the physical world, and we need to build world-class, operations and support for them as well, right? So yeah, there are different ways that you can scale a company when you're strictly operating in the world of bits versus in the world of atoms as well.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. We have some great questions coming in, and I'll get to those in just a second. Really appreciate everyone jumping in and asking questions. So, um, what? So, as I mentioned before, you took the tack of, and I I would be interested to know kind of what the light bulb moment was for this part of the business. Is you took the tack of targeting sort of that long tail of trucking, right? We anyone who's been in the industry for a long time knows there's, what is it, 80-90% of companies are 5 trucks or less. Most of them have no wherewithal to invest in technology. But as you said, most of them don't have the time to like actually manage this stuff while they're driving, right? So what was the thinking, not just in targeting that segment? Oh, they have problems, but thinking this was a problem that could be solved and we could be successful in doing so.
Yeah, so the way we looked at this, in 2019 was that the world had changed quite a bit. Um, if you kind of go back like 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago now, I think about 6 or 7 years ago, when companies like Convoy were getting founded, Uber Freight, you had brokers starting to invest a lot more in technology and building out their apps. To me, that was the first major wave of getting this long tail of trucking onto the digital world, right? And you started to have more and more owner operators adopt technology because they wanted transparent pricing. They wanted to be able to bid digitally as opposed to making phone calls. They wanted to be able to book a load instantly and know that they actually had that load. So that was the first full wave of this long tail, as you call it, kind of adopting technology. The second major wave was also the ELD mandate, right? So I think it came into effect in 2017, if I remember correctly. So yeah, so having again, owner operators having to download these apps, whether it's Keep Trucking, Samsara, whatever else they were using, was the second wave. So by 2019, the way we viewed it was. There was a lot of skepticism on whether owner operators would adopt technology, but in our view, they had already adopted technology, and an increasing number of them were adopting technology. So it was the right time to really focus on building the set of business management solutions for them and going a whole lot deeper, right? So going beyond just building out a marketplace or building the compliance solution for them, but like, how do you think about the way that they operate their entire business? Because ultimately, they are small business owners. They are generating, a substantial amount of money on a year-to-year basis, and they do need world-class software to be able to do that more and more efficiently, especially as the brokerage side of the house is getting more sophisticated, the shipper side of the house is getting more sophisticated, the large carriers are getting more sophisticated. So of course, the owner operators and the small fleets certainly need to be able to level up as well. So we saw it as like the right time, given everything else that had changed in the industry over the past 6 to 7 years.
Yeah, interesting. So the foundations that have been in place, both from the kind of freight matching side and the physical of the ELD, that was the precursor to kind of saying, okay, now that's interesting. Well, okay, let me ask, what do you, having worked with your customers now for a couple of years, what would you say is the biggest misconception that people have of truckers, especially independents or smaller fleets? We're we have a crowd that is in logistics, right? So
Yep.
well, they know how this works, but like, what's something that maybe when you peel back the layer of how they run their business, that total misconception?
Yeah, I think the first one is that truck drivers don't want to adopt technology. What one of the things that we see is that they're extremely curious, right? Like their industry is changing all around them, and they are just as curious and actually have very strong opinions on technology, much more so than anyone would expect. Now, there are skepticisms that they have, but these are well held, right? Like they're skeptical when someone wants to track their location all the time, and they certainly want to maintain their privacy. There are other reasons why they might be skeptical, but what we found is that truck drivers are like certainly early adopters, very interested in technology. Is the reason we ended up launching a podcast ourselves called Truckers and Nerds, because they were asking us so many questions about what was changing, and they wanted to get our views, not just on cloud truck software, but on other things that were changing in the industry. So I think that's the biggest misconception. The other one that I would like to see change is I think there's this view that we see a lot in the industry where people distrust the driver, right? So you have all of these different people when in the ecosystem, right? When a shipment is happening, you have the shipper who's trying to make sure that everything goes well. You have the receiver, you have the broker, and we've just found that anytime something goes wrong, the truck driver gets blamed. But we're seeing exactly what's happening with them. They're doing their best. They're very hardworking. They're trying to make sure that everything is delivered on time. They're largely extremely professional. So I think that's the other thing that we would like to see change in the industry, where people can trust the driver a lot more and understand that the driver is a working professional, but also is a business owner, and they care about the exact same things that every single business owner cares about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've noticed that social is great actually, because it's giving us a window into. I'm seeing this really across all sorts of very underrepresented populations in the logistics industry. You have people, certainly logistic professionals, who are speaking up more often, that people behind the computers kind of orchestrating this, but you have truck drivers all over the place on Twitter, like saying
Yep.
all sorts of really interesting stuff, some of it pretty out there, but some of it like really opening a window to a world that even people who work with them don't really understand. And you see it in the longshore labor, warehousing people, like everybody, all this stuff. There's so much more like sort of experiential transparency right now than ever before. So very interesting to hear you have like a podcast dedicated to truckers being nerds about tech. That's I mean, who would have thought, right? Like 5-10 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah. So, Tobenna, I wanted to ask. There was an interesting question that came in around how sort of um, your customers are managing through the pandemic, in terms of uh, yeah. This question may be a little bit uh, misunderstanding your place in this. So just to be clear, CloudTrucks is not a broker; it's a pure software provider for small carriers. But is the pandemic kind of pressing home the need for what you're doing more? I mean, this is something obviously I hear from most technology providers, right? Like this has been their moment of realization for a lot of companies. Have you? I guess it might be hard for you to sort of extrapolate that because you've mostly been a company during the pandemic, right? So,
Exactly.
but yeah, like, what's the feedback from carriers in terms of like what the pandemic means and their usage of tech?
Yeah, so it's always hard for me to answer these types of questions. Like you said, we've only operated during the pandemic, but I
You're
think
like
that
Bane. You're like Bane, you grow up
yeah,
in this world, so.
yeah, yeah. But I think that there is this thing happening across all industries since the pandemic. a lot of things that were happening in the physical world started to move to the digital world, for better or for worse, right? And that is certainly true in the trucking industry as well. So, we focus on the driver side of the house, and we're building all of the tools for them. But one of the things that I've seen is that, the brokers or the facilities are getting more digitized, right? So that actually makes it easier for us to do these integrations that end up serving the driver. So for example, on our app, a driver can search for a load and they can see loads coming from multiple different brokers. We certainly want more and more and more brokers and shippers to be fully digital. And I think the pandemic has driven that adoption on that side, which has made our lives easier because we can now do those integrations, which then serves the driver because they can see more loads, and we can surface to them the best loads that they can pick with our schedule optimizer. So those are the types of effects that I'm seeing. Anything that affects the shipper side or the broker side or the facilities ends up ultimately affecting the driver. And I think it's a net positive for the industry if we can get more and more of these workflows online. It's just a lot more efficient for everybody.
Do you ever sometimes think, or is this just a waste of time because you've got too much stuff to do on your mind? But do you ever think how Cloud Trucks would have progressed, what your revenue level would have been in a different environment, like a non-pandemic environment, a low demand environment, like how that would have changed kind of reception of what you're doing, uptake of the product? Like, do you ever kind of do that hypothetical, or are you just, this is the real world, let's just focus on what the real world is?
Yeah, largely, I like to think this is the real world. Let's focus on what it is. But before the pandemic, so we had this whole plan of how we were going to launch, right? We figured that it's a tall order to tell an owner operator to just like download this software, don't meet anyone in person, and trust that you can use this to run your entire business. I mean, in our very first with our very first products, which we now call virtual carrier, we are the trucking carrier. They're leasing onto our authority. We are literally helping them manage all aspects of their business. So a lot of trust is being placed on us there. So the original plan was to go on a tour, right? I was going to go on a tour. We own a truck ourselves, and we were going to go truck stop to truck stop. We were going to meet truck drivers in person, and this was going to be our way of showing that we are, real people, not just sitting behind a computer. And then that was thrown out the door with the pandemic. So I don't know if that would have made us more successful, less successful, right? It's really hard to tell, but I think that the product that we're building is needed in any environment. Like I keep saying, these are, small business owners. They need the same set of tools that all small business owners need, whether it's in a pandemic or not in a pandemic, whether it's with inflated rates on the freight side or with deflated rates on the freight side. Like I could make the arguments that the stuff that we've built is actually more critical in an environment where rates are lower, because
Right.
that's when you care even more about efficiency.
I feel the same way. I feel like this is it's almost like gravy right now for small carriers, because like you would have to be running your business really badly to not be doing pretty decently in this market. It's going to be when the tide goes out that I think the true value of some of the stuff that you're building and others will really start to surface. So super interesting. I do wonder what the adoption curve would have been in that environment, though, right? That's because a lot of them might have gone out of business before they even had a chance to work with you. And right. So yes, there may have been some others that came in, but well, let me broaden this out. Like one of the things that we talked about the last time I had a chance to interview you for joc.com was this idea of whether trucking software, just sort of logistics market as a whole is a winner takes all market, right? Can you give me some thoughts about whether how we should think about that? Because obviously, again, the misconception sometimes around VC is like, well, you put $1 billion into a company so that they can wipe everybody else out, right? Is that the wrong way to think about this?
Yeah, it's. I don't think it's a winner take all market, but as with most markets, there is usually a large separation between the number one and number two player and everyone else. And I think that we are going to see some of that play out in the logistics space. Maybe not in all aspects of logistics. I think different aspects have different things at play. But I think we are going to see some of that in the logistics space and in the software logistics space. And we've started to see that to some extent, right? Like it's pretty clear what the top three ELD providers are. And I think over time, it's going to be clear what maybe not the top three, but the top 10 brokers are. And the same thing is going to play out in other areas, I think, as things are digitized. For us, we don't want to take the entire market. I think that's kind of impossible given what we're building. We want to make sure that we are working with the best drivers out there, because ultimately it makes everyone's lives easier if we're working with the best and the safest drivers, and we can prove that they're the safest drivers and they're very professional and they're on time, and that makes it easier to connect them to the best brokers and the best shippers, right? Because I think there's a lot of shippers maybe don't work directly with owner operators and don't view them as kind of worth their time in a sense, and there are different reasons for that. So we want to be able to change that, and I think the best way for us to change that is to work with the very best in the industry. So that by definition means that we can't work with everybody.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I do think one thing that tech has created is like the rules of engagement have totally blurred, right? Like it used to be small shipper had to go to a broker, small carrier had to work with broker. That's all changing now, and it's changing like really quickly in real time. And it doesn't mean that that type of stream of commercial engagement goes away completely, but you basically I've sort of like described this big picture as you're now at this big you have a buffet, as opposed to like you used to get a menu with like two dinner options. Now you have a buffet of options to choose at each sort of step of the process, and that can be confusing on one side of the equation. Yep. But it's empowering in another. So maybe one last question, and this isn't necessarily directly related to your business, but I want to get your thoughts because this is something I think about a lot, especially around kind of the TMS or operating space or operating system space that different players in the industry use. My take, and I'm interested to hear your opinion on this. My take is, let's take a TMS. You can't build a TMS that works equally for everybody. There's been, I think there's some providers out there that are aiming to build this kind of like nirvana state where there's a system in the middle, and the supply side and the demand side both get equal benefits. My view is if that exists, it's going to be a very long time, and there will be some big dynamic changes that make that happen. In the meantime, someone needs to buy a system and implement a system and maintain a system, and they are not going to be happy getting half of the benefit and their commercial partner getting the other half of the benefit if that party doesn't pay. Am I thinking about this wrong?
Yeah, I think your framing is largely correct. I think generally, just to build a really good product, you have to focus on a specific type of persona. In fact, like let's even take a step back from the building something for shippers and for carriers at the same time. It's very hard to build a really good product for a small business and a large business at the same time, even if you focus on just one side, right? So over a long enough period of time, all of this gets solved. We're still in the early innings of it, and I think 10 years down the line, you could have a company that has built equally good software for both sides. But I think for the stage that we're at today, and I don't mean Cloud Trucks, I mean the industry overall, players have to focus their energy on specific parts of the market. There's so much going on the carrier side of the house, there's so much going on the broker side of the house, and there's so much going on the shipper side of the house. And each of these players doesn't have the exact same set of problems. So naturally, different solutions would apply to one of those three. Now, that isn't to say, however, that someone who's focusing on shipper software can't provide some specific set of values to a carrier and vice versa, right? So for example, with us, I believe that over time, we probably have the cleanest, clearest data set on the how professional a driver is. So this is like on-time performance and things like that across all of the jobs that they're doing, and how safe a driver is across all of the jobs that they're doing. And maybe that specific data is interesting to a shipper customer, right? But we're not going to be able to build world-class TMS for a shipper, and we're not trying to. We've decided to just hyper focus on these trucking entrepreneurs. So I think that's largely what's going to happen. That's probably how things are going to play out over the next 5 to 10 years. And the people who are going to build the best software are the people who hyper focus on the right set of customers.
Yeah, well said. Well, Tobenna, thank you so much. This is I always learn a lot talking to you, so I really appreciate you taking some time to join us today. And you want to let people know where to find more info on Cloud Trucks?
Yeah, so you can go on cloudtrucks.com. We have a lot of information on our website. We're also on Facebook. So search for Cloud Trucks on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok. We have a lot of fun stuff on TikTok. So you can find us in a number of different places.
I'm too old for TikTok already. So yeah, I'll have to trust you on that. But thanks so much for joining us, Tobenna. Best of luck and Happy New Year.
All right, same to you. Take care.
Cheers, bye. Okay, well, we are almost out of time, but we still have enough time for our favorite wrap-up activities. First, of course, dad joke. I'm in my kid's room. I got Voltron over this corner. I got, Corvette pictures on this corner. So I turned to my son to give me a good dad joke this month. So I guess it's a kid dad joke. I don't know. How do you phrase that? Anyway, here's the dad joke of the month. What pop star loves the winter? This is appropriate. It's snow outside. Justin Bieber. Come on, that's pretty good, right? If you don't like it, just send some complaints to the customer service department. All right. So before we finish, buzzword of the month this month is Web3. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have any idea what Web3 is, and I could not describe any of it to you. No, I guess it's somewhat related though. So I'm going to take a crack at explaining decentralized or decentralization instead. What does decentralization mean from a technology perspective, and more specifically a logistics technology perspective? And is it good, right? The whole point of this is for me to give sort of my verdict on whether it's impactful or not. So there's many ways to think about decentralization. Is a process decentralized? Think about procurement, right? You may have a team, you may have a centralized procurement department that handles everything from paper clips to $1 million freight spend. You may have a decentralized procurement, especially on the logistics side, where you're handing off pieces to people in different, maybe by mode or certainly by region, especially if you're procuring globally. That's obviously one sort of decentralization. Is the infrastructure decentralized? So think about servers, right? Is everything housed in one location, or are you relying on sort of a single point? Or do you have a decentralized set of infrastructure? People, obviously, this has been front and center over the last 2 years. Are you in an office where all your intellectual capital is in one place? Or are you remote? Are you all over the world? So, I mean, I think decentralized has come up a lot in recent years in terms of what it means to blockchain. And I'm certainly, with about a minute to go, not going to go into blockchain. But to me, decentralized is a tricky topic because it doesn't mean there's no universal answer, right? Every company needs to think about risk. They need to think about efficiency. They need to think about new technologies that are dependent on things being decentralized, before they decide whether a decentralized approach to technology, or some of those other things, the people using it or the infrastructure supporting it, are the right choice. So I would encourage you to all kind of do your reading on the benefits of decentralization, because there's a lot to it, right? So that is it. That's all the time. This always goes so fast. I always look up and go, man, it's already 45 past the hour. Thank you to everybody who tuned in. Thank you again to Chain.io for sponsoring. You can check out my newsletter at Substack. It's Eric Johnson. I think it's ericjohnson.substack.com. I think that's the URL. Yeah, ericjohnson.substack.com. Of course, check me at joc.com. Of course, check me on Twitter, Logtech Eric. Happy New Year to everybody. Also, I believe this is in some of the promotional material around the show, but TPM Tech is coming at the end of February in Long Beach, just ahead of TPM. Use the code LogTechLive to get a discount on either a pass for TPM Tech or a bundle with TPM. So would love to see you there. It's an awesome, awesome show. We have 40 speakers, 19 sessions, tons of cool topics to discuss. I hope to see you there. Thank you again to everyone who tuned in, and we'll see you at the beginning of February.